In the bustling Italy of the 13th century, when heresies threatened to corrode the foundations of the Christian faith, a man was born who would become a symbol of courage and orthodoxy. Peter was born in Verona around the year 1205 into a family that was unfortunately immersed in the Cathar heresy. From birth, one breathed an air of distrust toward the church, but God had already reserved something special for him. While still very young, Peter began to show signs that his soul belonged entirely to Christ. Despite the heretical upbringing he received at home, Peter had contact with Catholic doctrine at school. It was there, hearing the Apostles' Creed, that he had his first illumination of the true faith. Upon repeating the words of the profession of faith, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty," Peter was overwhelmed by a profound interior emotion. Even as a child, he understood that this was the truth and that he should persevere in it. His parents, realizing his inclination toward Catholicism, tried to divert him with arguments and pressure, but in vain. The faith had already taken firm root in his heart. As he grew, so did his desire to serve God. With a keen intelligence and a fervent soul, Peter displayed a rare zeal that drew everyone's attention around him. Providence then guided his steps toward a luminous vocation. It was in Bologna, a renowned university city, that Peter met the sons of Saint Dominic de Guzman, who had recently founded the Order of Preachers. Seeing the Dominicans preaching with fervor and living in poverty, Peter felt irresistibly drawn to that life of surrender. Around age 16, he entered the order, taking the black and white habit and beginning his path of sanctification. In the Order of Preachers, he encountered the apostolic spirit of Saint Dominic. He understood that the mission of the Dominicans was not only to study, but above all to combat heresy with love and firmness. Peter applied himself diligently to the study of philosophy and theology, quickly becoming one of the best students. His preaching, even as a student, already profoundly moved hearts. With his priestly ordination, Peter began an intense apostolic activity. He traveled through cities and villages in Italy, preaching the truth of the Catholic faith with clarity and passion. There was no room for half-truths in his mouth. He spoke with the authority of one who lived what he preached. The Albigensian heresy in particular was his constant target, for he saw in it a direct threat to Christ's flock. His preaching did not please everyone. Many heretics saw Peter as a dangerous enemy because his words dismantled their arguments and converted souls to the true gospel. Even so, he was unafraid. He knew that the mission of a Dominican was precisely this: to be a defender of the truth, even in the face of death, and he embraced this mission with serene courage. Peter was not only an eloquent preacher, he was a man of deep interior life. He spent hours in prayer, often in tears before the crucified one. He fasted rigorously, always seeking penance and mortification. His love for the Eucharist was ardent, and before the Blessed Sacrament, he spent long moments in silent adoration, drawing strength for his mission. The fame of his holiness began to spread throughout Italy. Crowds flocked to hear him, and many were converted. Cures and miracles started happening through his intercession, even while he was alive. But Peter never sought personal glory. He attributed everything to God's grace, saying that he was nothing, just a poor instrument in the hands of the Lord. His piety was balanced by a luminous intelligence. Peter was known for his ability to dialogue with heretics using solid arguments and patience. He never became exasperated, but he also never gave in to lies. He showed that charity and truth do not oppose each other, but rather complete each other. For this reason, he drew even his opponents to him, who found themselves disarmed by his meekness. So effective was he that Pope Gregory IX appointed him inquisitor, with the mission of officially combating heresies in Lombardy. The Inquisition at the time was a pastoral response to the spread of doctrines that endangered the salvation of souls. Peter assumed this function not with harshness, but with pastoral zeal and great love for sinners. As inquisitor, Peter acted with justice and mercy. He listened carefully to cases, gave opportunities for repentance, and always strove for conversion, not punishment. But his doctrinal firmness left no room for doubt. To those who persisted obstinately in error, he offered the truth as a lighthouse, even when that cost him threats and hatred. Peter was aware that his mission would be very costly. He himself said that he expected martyrdom, and he prepared for it with faith. The cross was for him a constant companion. He lived as one who had already given his life to Christ, and therefore did not fear death. His brothers in the order admired his fervor, but also feared for his safety. The conspiracies against his life began to intensify. Heretics, annoyed by his effectiveness, began plotting his death. It was a high price for fidelity to the truth, but Peter did not back down. He continued traveling, preaching, counseling, even knowing that his steps were being watched. His heart was at peace, surrendered to God's will. One day, during a sermon in the city of Milan, Peter vigorously proclaimed the Catholic faith before a divided crowd. His inflamed words, coming from a pure heart, moved even the most hardened. He ended his homily with a phrase that would prove prophetic: "I will defend the faith with my blood if necessary." That phrase resounded like a challenge to those conspiring against him. They decided it was time to silence him for good. They hired a hitman named Carino to carry out the plan. Carino was a rough man, hardened of heart, and he would be the instrument to seal Peter's martyrdom. The plan was set, and the day approached. Peter, for his part, continued his routine as missionary and inquisitor. He heard confessions, visited the sick, celebrated Holy Mass with devotion. Each of his gestures reflected divine charity. He showed no fear, but a mysterious serenity, as though already sensing that his encounter with Christ was near. His life was a continual offering to the Lord. On April 6, 1252, Peter was traveling from Milan to Como, accompanied by another friar. On the way, they entered a forest. It was the perfect setting for an ambush. Carino and another accomplice lay in wait. Unknowingly, Peter drew close to the consummation of his sacrifice. The sky that day seemed heavy, as if in advance mourning. When the assassins appeared, Peter did not flee. He received the first blow with courage, which opened his head deeply. He fell to the ground, covered in blood, but still alive. With the little strength he had left, he wrote on the ground, with his own blood, the words of the creed, Credo in Deum, I believe in God. That was his last profession of faith. The other friar tried to help him, but was also gravely injured. Peter, however, surrendered his soul to God with serenity. He died as he had lived, with fidelity. His body was collected and taken to Milan, where the people already venerated him as a martyr. News of his death spread rapidly, and crowds came to pay homage to his body. Peter's martyrdom was not in vain. Many who had persecuted him were converted. Carino himself, touched by grace, repented deeply of his crime. He sought out the Dominicans and, in tears, begged forgiveness. He spent the rest of his life in penance, eventually being received into the Order of Preachers itself, where he lived as an example of conversion. Pope Innocent IV, impressed by Peter's life and death, canonized him in record time, only 11 months after his martyrdom in 1253. He declared him a saint of the Catholic Church, recognizing not only his heroic witness, but also the countless miracles that were already occurring through his intercession. Saint Peter Martyr joined the ranks of the saints in glory. The Church began to celebrate his liturgical feast on April 29th, and his devotions spread throughout Christendom. His figure, with the symbol of the sword in his head and the creed in his hand, became an icon of martyrdom for the faith. His memory came to be especially invoked in times of persecution and doctrinal doubt. Saint Peter of Verona became patron against heresy, and his life was taken as a model of apostolic fervor for preachers. His fidelity to doctrine, his tireless charity, and his courage in martyrdom are a beacon for the Church in every age. His figure remains alive in the Dominican tradition and in the hearts of the faithful. The blood Peter shed fertilized the faith in medieval Italy. Where once there was doubt, certainty was born. Where there was error, truth emerged. His testimony proves that holiness is not an escape from the world, but a radical plunge into love for God and for truth. And with this spirit, we continue to tell his story. After his martyrdom, deep emotion gripped the cities where Peter had passed. The people wept not only for the loss of a beloved preacher, but for a true spiritual father. In Milan, people formed long processions to venerate his body. Many claimed to have already received graces through his immediate intercession, with inexplicable healings and miracles. The funeral was a true manifestation of popular faith. Peter's body was exposed in the church of Sant'Eustorgio, and an uncountable multitude spent entire days in vigil. Chants, prayers, and tears set the atmosphere of that farewell, which was more a celebration than mourning. The church recognized that a great saint had been received into heaven. Stories of miracles performed by Saint Peter quickly began to circulate. Paralyzed people walked again, the sick recovered their health, and the possessed were freed. All of this further increased the people's devotion. It was not long before the fame of the martyr went beyond the borders of Italy, spreading to other regions of Christian Europe. Pope Innocent IV received countless testimonies of Peter's holiness and intercession. Convinced by the sanctity of his life and the evidence of the miracles, he declared his canonization on March 9, 1253, less than a year after the martyrdom. It was an extraordinary recognition for both the speed and the unanimity of faith around the new saint. In the bull of canonization, the Pope exalted Peter as an example for the whole Church. He highlighted his courage in defending the truth before error, his life of prayer and penance, and his love for neighbor, including his enemies. Thus, Peter's figure became a mirror of evangelical charity and doctrinal firmness. The order of preachers received the canonization with rejoicing. Saint Peter became the first martyr of the Dominican order, and his example began to be constantly recalled in preaching and formation. From a young age, novices learned that being Dominican meant being ready to die for the truth, just as Peter had done. His memory became a living flame among the children of Saint Dominic. Artists began portraying his life and martyrdom in frescoes, paintings, and sculptures. In these images, Peter often appears with a sword stuck in his head, a symbol of his martyrdom, and the creed written in his hand, an expression of his faithfulness to the end. These depictions became common in churches, monasteries, and convents. His tomb in Milan soon became a place of pilgrimage. The faithful from all over Europe came seeking graces and miracles. Many left ex votos, small objects or inscriptions, in thanks for received healings. It was a silent but powerful witness to Peter of Verona's sanctity. Devotion to Saint Peter Martyr grew so much that in many cities in Europe, churches were built in his honor. His liturgical feast, initially celebrated with local solemnity, was incorporated into the general calendar of the church. At Masses, priests recalled his example of zeal, his consecrated life, and his witness of martyrdom. In Christian spirituality, Peter came to be seen as a model of fortitude. He was invoked by those who faced persecution, by theologians seeking the truth, and by all who fought against error. His intercession was especially sought in times of doctrinal crisis, when confusion threatened Christ's flock. The most remarkable fruit, however, was the conversion generated by his martyrdom. Among those who were most deeply transformed was Carino, Peter's very assassin. With his heart torn by guilt, he sought a Dominican convent and begged forgiveness. From then on, he began a life of rigorous penance and constant prayer. Carino was received into the order as a lay brother, and he spent his days in silence, humility, and work. He lived as if each act of his life were an act of reparation. Many who knew him witnessed his profound contrition and love of God. At the end of his life, he died reconciled with the Church, a living proof of divine mercy. This episode deeply moved contemporaries. It showed that even the greatest sinners can find redemption through God's grace. Carino's life, transformed by Peter's blood, became a symbol of love's triumph over hatred. A murderer turned into a penitent through the intercession of a martyr. Peter's story also influenced how the Church came to understand martyrdom as the seed of new Christians. The blood he shed not only sealed his fidelity, but produced countless fruits of faith. Thus his death was not a defeat, but a victory. His voice, silenced by the enemy, resonated even more powerfully in hearts. In the Dominican order, a special commemoration was instituted in his honor. Over the centuries, the friars invoked his name in times of persecution and trials. Itinerant preachers carried a small image of Saint Peter Martyr with them, asking for protection and inspiration for the apostolic missions they undertook. His example was also cited by later saints, such as Saint Catherine of Siena, who saw in Peter a figure of purity and courage. Saint Vincent Ferrer also referred to Peter's martyrdom in his sermons, encouraging the faithful not to fear suffering for Christ's sake. Popular devotion kept his memory alive in the following centuries. Many families placed images of Saint Peter Martyr in their homes as a sign of protection against spiritual and doctrinal dangers. He was regarded as the guardian of the true faith and a defender against the temptations of heresy and error. In times of schism and ecclesial confusion, Peter was invoked as an example of fidelity to the Church. His life showed that even in a hostile culture, it was possible to remain faithful to Christ and his bride, the Holy Catholic Church. This made him all the more relevant and necessary in the crises the Church faced. During the Council of Trent, many conciliar fathers remembered Peter's example as a model of orthodoxy. In times when the Protestant Reformation was being combated, Saint Peter Martyr was exalted as a bulwark against doctrinal disorder. His image was again highlighted in pulpits and theological treatises. Over time, his memory also became celebrated in literary and hagiographic works. Several authors of medieval and Renaissance spirituality wrote about him, recounting his miracles and virtues. Devotional works were distributed among the faithful, encouraging the imitation of his faith and trust in his intercession. St. Peter Martyr's image also began to appear on rosaries, medals, and devotional objects. His name became familiar, especially to simple folk who saw in him a celestial friend amid the struggles of daily life. Many parents named their sons Peter in his honor. In Christian education, Peter was taken as an example of resistance to error from youth. Teachers and catechists used his story to teach children the importance of knowing and defending the faith. His life showed that even in a hostile environment, grace can flourish and triumph. Peter's spirituality was profoundly centered on the crucified Christ. He saw, in the mystery of the Passion, the deepest meaning of his own vocation. Therefore, it was common to find him meditating at length before the cross, often in tears, begging for the grace to unite himself to the Redeemer's sufferings. His devotion to the Virgin Mary was also remarkable. Peter had a filial tenderness for Our Lady, invoking her as the Mother of Truth. He said that with Mary it was impossible to get lost along the way, and it was to her that he entrusted his preaching and his mission to combat errors against the faith. In the silence of prayer and the noise of public squares, Peter was always the same, a man conformed to Christ. His unity of life, without contradictions, bore witness that holiness is possible for those who live in truth. And his story, even centuries later, continues to inspire the Church. While Saint Peter's body rested on earth, his soul, according to Christian piety, already shone among the elect in heaven. On earth, the fruits of his self-offering sprang up like sources of renewal. In convents, monasteries, and dioceses, vocations inspired by his example multiplied. Young people were moved by the desire to follow Christ with the same radical commitment. The Dominican order recognized in him not only a martyr, but a paradigm of its own identity. As a faithful son of St. Dominic, Peter lived the essential triad of the order: prayer, study, and preaching. His martyrdom confirmed the Dominican charism as a precious gift to the Church, a gift that demands one be ready to shed one's blood. In medieval universities, especially in Paris, his name began to be mentioned among the great intellectual saints. He was an answer to those who intended to separate reason and faith. Peter, though a martyr, was also a scholar of theology, demonstrating that human intelligence, when guided by grace, serves truth with humility and precision. The cult of Saint Peter spread rapidly throughout Europe. Churches were dedicated to him in various cities: Florence, Rome, Lisbon, Barcelona, and even in smaller towns where the Dominican order put down roots. His image became familiar among Christian people, and many relics were reverently distributed throughout different regions. In sacred art, Saint Peter Martyr began to be represented with striking details. Always with his head wounded by a sword or dagger, holding the creed as the symbol of his final statement of faith. The iconography was not merely decorative but catechetical. It reminded Christians that the faith must be upheld even at the cost of life. Thousands of the faithful, in moments of difficulty, invoked his name, seeking the strength to remain faithful to the Catholic truth. And many testified to receiving graces. Simple people called him the Saint of the Faith and entrusted their most urgent spiritual needs to him. The popular devotion grew like a living flame. In the centuries following his martyrdom, especially during the Renaissance and Protestant heresies, Saint Peter was increasingly venerated as a model of doctrinal fidelity. Bishops and theologians looked to his example when the truth of the gospel seemed obscured by the darkness of error. His figure was regarded as a light in the night of doubt. During the 14th century, the number of confraternities and brotherhoods dedicated to Saint Peter Martyr increased. These lay associations, often linked to the Dominicans, promoted devotion to the saint, organized processions, celebrated votive masses, and distributed alms in his honor. This was faith incarnate in the daily life of the people. In the city of Milan, his spiritual presence was never forgotten. The Milanese took him as patron and protector. Every year on his feast day, they solemnly celebrated his martyrdom with festive masses, charitable acts, and processions in the streets. Even the city's rulers recognized his historical and spiritual importance. Numerous miracles continued to be attributed to his intercession. One of the most famous involved a boy who had fallen from a great height. The mother, desperate, invoked Saint Peter of Verona, and against all expectations the child stood up unhurt. This miracle was recognized by ecclesiastical authority as a sign of the saint's protection. Another striking case was that of a young woman who, slandered and about to be unjustly condemned, asked for Saint Peter's intercession. At the moment of the trial, the truth was miraculously revealed, freeing her from accusation. From then on, he was also invoked as a patron against slander and falsehood. During the Black Death in the 14th century, entire communities turned to him for protection and healing. Although many suffered, testimonies claim that wherever devotion to St. Peter Martyr spread, the effects of the plague were mitigated. These narratives further fueled people's trust in his intercession. The Council of Basel, and later the Council of Trent, reinforced the importance of saints as models and intercessors. Among the martyrs, Saint Peter was frequently cited as a witness of doctrinal integrity. His figure was used in treatises and sermons as the model of the true disciple of Christ in times of crisis. In popular spirituality, a particular custom developed of writing or carrying the words Credo in Diem, recalling the last phrase written by Saint Peter in his own blood. This gesture was seen as an expression of faithfulness to the faith, and many performed it before dangerous journeys or important decisions. In sacred architecture, chapels and altars dedicated to him began to display scenes from his life, especially his martyrdom and Carino's conversion. These images inspired the faithful to conversion, confidence in God's mercy, and perseverance in adversity. Art thus became a living catechesis. In Dominican convents, it was common to perform theatrical portrayals of his life, especially during Holy Week. These productions depicted not only his martyrdom, but also his apostolic zeal and the power of prayer. Children and young people were particularly touched by these presentations, which conveyed eternal values. Saint Peter's spirituality also inspired the composition of hymns and specific songs. In various regions of Europe, his feasts were celebrated with songs especially composed for him. These hymns exalted his fidelity, his total surrender to Christ, and his glory in heaven as a powerful intercessor. In the 16th century, when the winds of the Protestant Reformation blew strongly, many Catholic missionaries invoked Saint Peter before setting out to conflicted territories. They saw in him not only a protector, but a model of how to live charity and truth, even in the face of hatred and persecution. The Society of Jesus, although not Dominican, also recognized Peter as a model. Several Jesuits wrote about him and taught his story in missions and schools. This shows how his figure transcended the boundaries of a religious order and touched the heart of the entire church. In times of religious persecution, such as Elizabethan England, the faithful hid images of Saint Peter Martyr as a sign of fidelity to the Catholic faith. He was a symbol of courage in the face of oppression. Many Catholic martyrs of those times bore his name or carried a small relic of his. In colonial Brazil, Dominican missionaries brought with them relics and images of Saint Peter, spreading his devotion among the indigenous and colonists. He was presented as an example of courage and faith. In some regions, chapels were built in his honor, especially in places where intense spiritual struggles were fought. As centuries passed, devotion to Saint Peter of Verona did not diminish, but took on new forms. Lay people and religious alike continued to find in him inspiration for fidelity, especially in modern times marked by relativism and secularism. His life remains a prophetic cry. The truth is worth more than one's own life. Even in the modern West, where physical martyrdom is less common, the figure of Saint Peter Martyr reminds us that bearing witness to the faith still requires courage. Whether in academic settings, on social media, or in one's own home, defending the Catholic truth remains a challenging mission. Contemporary theologians see in Saint Peter a perfect example of the union between doctrine and charity. He was not merely polemical, but a shepherd of souls. He fought error firmly, but he loved each person ardently. This combination remains both timely and necessary. Concluding this part of the narrative, we can firmly affirm that Saint Peter of Verona, even after centuries, is not merely a figure of the past. He is a living presence in the Church, a powerful intercessor, and a beacon for all who wish to live the Catholic faith with fidelity and courage, no matter the cost. The timeliness of Saint Peter of Verona's witness is revealed even more forcefully today, when truth suffers subtle and persistent attacks. In a world that relativizes values and questions the foundations of faith, the figure of a martyr who shed his own blood for affirming "I believe in God" resounds like a cry from heaven. Catholic families, aware of the challenges they face in raising their children, find in Saint Peter a model of perseverance and fidelity from youth. He who grew up in a heretical home yet was touched by the light of the true faith proves that God's grace can triumph even in the most hostile environments. His example also enlightens catechists and Christian educators, reminding them that teaching the truth is not just repeating formulas, but arousing a deep love for Christ and the Church. Saint Peter, who since childhood kept the creed in his heart, shows that the seed of faith can flourish powerfully. The order of preachers continues to venerate him with special affection. In initial formation, novices learn about his life and martyrdom, and many Dominican convents keep his relics or images. He is regarded as an older brother, protector, and model of radical fidelity to the Dominican charism. In times of new missionary challenges, Saint Peter also inspires those called to evangelize in settings marked by unbelief or hostility. Missionaries who serve in regions where the Christian faith is persecuted recall the Dominican martyr as a spiritual companion on their journey. In ecclesial spirituality, Peter is continually remembered in prayers for the unity of faith. Faced with the scandal of internal divisions and the spread of doctrines contrary to the magisterium, his intercession is sought so that the Church may remain one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, rooted in the truth revealed by God. Saint Peter also touches the hearts of many priests, who see in him a reflection of how to live their ministry with fidelity and devotion. His priestly life was marked by pastoral zeal, love of truth, and charity toward souls. His example reminds priests that both the altar and the pulpit are places of sacrifice. Every April 29th, the Church solemnly celebrates his liturgical memorial. Special masses are celebrated, relics are venerated, and the faithful renew their commitment to the faith. It is an opportunity to rediscover the value of martyrdom as the supreme witness of love for God, and to reflect on our own Christian fidelity. His mortal remains are still in Milan, in the Basilica of Sant'Eustorgio, where pilgrims from around the world go to pray and seek graces. This place became a symbol of faith's triumph over hatred. There one can contemplate the greatness of a life poured out for love of Christ and his Church. Over the centuries, many saints visited Saint Peter's tomb to seek strength in their own missions. Saint Charles Borromeo, for example, had a deep devotion to him, seeing in him the example of a missionary bishop and a combatant against heresy. Other bishops and cardinals also went there to find the wisdom and firmness needed to govern. In Dominican tradition, Saint Peter Martyr holds a place of honor alongside Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Dominic de Guzman, and Saint Catherine of Siena. All are regarded as pillars of truth and examples of how holiness flourishes in daily fidelity to one's vocation: prayer, study, and action. These three pillars form the heart of the Dominican charism, and Peter lived them so intensely that his life became their synthesis. He studied with fervor, prayed with intensity, and preached with power. His life was a unity that radiated Christ. Catholic youth, thirsty for authenticity, find in him a model of coherence and courage. In a time when so many yield to ideological pressures, Saint Peter shows that it is possible to swim against the current, affirming the truth with firmness and gentleness, even in the face of mockery and hatred. Although his martyrdom was violent, it was surrounded by an aura of serenity and forgiveness. There is no record of hatred in his final words. By writing Credo in Deum with his own blood, Peter sealed his life with the seal of faith and forgiveness. The cross for him was glory and victory. In modern times, when martyrdom can manifest in new ways through public ridicule of the faith, social or professional exclusion, Saint Peter becomes all the more relevant. He teaches us that white martyrdom, lived day by day, is also a powerful witness of love for God. Theologians and historians recognize in Saint Peter of Verona a figure of synthesis between personal holiness, intellectual vigor, and pastoral fidelity. He did not just condemn errors, he presented the beauty of truth with words full of light and with a life that confirmed everything he preached. His figure also represents a warning for the Church. The truth of the faith must be announced with courage and love, even when it meets rejection. Peter reminds us that charity without truth is confusion, and truth without charity is cruelty. He united the two in a perfect way. Relics of Saint Peter are spread across various countries. Small fragments of his bones, clothing, or objects that belong to him are preserved with devotion and exposed on special occasions. These material signs remind us that holiness is something concrete, lived in the flesh, and not just an abstract idea. Catechists and formators are encouraged to teach about Saint Peter as part of doctrinal formation. His life shows that knowing the catechism, praying with one's heart, and living what one believes are sure paths to holiness. He's also a model of perseverance in prayer and in the study of the truths of the faith. In seminaries and religious houses of formation, his story is a constant reminder of the prophetic mission that the Church must exercise in the world. Future priests and consecrated persons are called to look to him as an example of self-giving and missionary zeal that does not settle for less, but is consumed by love of God. Today, with the advancement of technology and digital culture, the figure of Saint Peter is being rediscovered in new formats. Documentaries, podcasts, posts, and videos about his life help bring his story to new generations. Thus, he becomes a saint for our time, who challenges us with his burning testimony. In communities threatened by ideologies contrary to the faith, his intercession is fervently sought. Many testify to spiritual deliverances by invoking his name, especially against doctrinal errors and moral confusions. He remains a guardian of truth and a defender of those who seek the light of Christ. The name of Peter of Verona echoes through the centuries like a song of fidelity. He was not a man of compromises with the world, but with heaven. He did not seek personal glory, but solely the glory of God. And so God glorified him before men, giving him a place of honor among the saints. His life is a call to coherence, courage, and holiness. It is an invitation for every Catholic to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth, even when that is costly. Peter teaches us that living the faith is not just one option among many, but the definitive response to the truth that sets us free. We end this narration with gratitude for such a radiant witness of faith. Saint Peter of Verona, Apostle of truth, martyr of charity, pray for us. May we, through your intercession, also be firm in faith, bold in hope, and inflamed with charity, until the day when, with you, we may behold the face of God for all eternity.